and welcome to Rewind Reviews, the podcast where we take a look at movies from our past and ask the age-old question of, is that any good? So this week was my turn to take a stab in the dark, Chris, and I picked a movie I'm a little bit afraid of, or was a little bit afraid of, and we'll get into the answer of whether that was justified or not momentarily. It's a strange one for me, because this is a very important film in young Dan's life. I would argue, Chris, this was my first favourite film. Like 5-year-old, 6-year-old Dan loved this movie. Had it on VHS, ran that VHS through to the ground, to the nub. It barely worked when I was finished with it. But you've come into this with no background with this film at all. Like it sounded to me like you didn't know this movie existed until I named it, which is quite. Is that fair, or is that?
Somewhere, like if I was on a quiz show, right, and they said, does a movie called The Great Mouse Detective exist? I think I'd have gone yes, but that's, vague familiarity with the title. Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to tell you Disney movie from back in the day or anything like that. I would have, if you'd have said it's a Disney movie, I'd have then gone Mickey Mouse, not Sherlock Holmes. So yes. Yeah, no, I didn't really know this movie existed at all.
So to very briefly, I'll be as brief as I can explain my history with this. I had this VHS, and basically, if you go back through my childhood, you can sort of pinpoint there are different times in my life when different films were sort of my favorite film, because children are fickle. There was a time when, as I got towards my sort of, I don't know, 13, 14, Star Wars was the thing. Before that, it was Back to the Future. Before that, Roger Rabbit. Earlier than that, Short Circuit. But the very first film I can remember ever being the answer to the question, favorite film, is Basil the Great Mouse Detective, as it was known in the UK. For listeners who are thinking it's not called Basil the Great Mouse Detective, I found that out literally yesterday, that it's called The Great Mouse Detective in every other country. That's a UK
because when
exclusive.
You first said about it to me, you said Basil, and then obviously everything on it says, The Great Mouse Detective. And I've just literally Googled, because when you said about the VHS, I'm like, I'd like to picture the VHS. So I just added VHS to the search, and then all the images are Basil. And I just went, that 2 seconds before you said it, I came to the conclusion, that must be why Dan thinks of it as Basil the Great Mouse Detective.
Yeah, so have you got the purple cover?
Yeah. I assume is the one you had.
I'll send you the one I had. I've got it here. Does WhatsApp recognize this kind of image? Drag file. Yeah. Well, okay. So if you look at your WhatsApp, Chris, I hope I just sent that to you, not just to some rando. Yeah. There's a purple cover. That's the VHS that I was by the time I was done, the edges of that image were frayed. It was. I'll use that as the image on the thumbnail for the YouTube video for anyone interested. That's the poster I'll use. We'll talk about the American poster later because it's quite different for reasons we'll get into. But basically, this was
just to tease that. If the American poster is what's on the Wikipedia, so with the white background. Yes. The American poster is insane. Yeah. Like what they have chosen to prioritize in that poster is wild.
Yep. Well, that's what happens when you try to un-Sherlock your Sherlock adaptation. We'll talk about it. Don't know why they chose to make it. Well, I do. They're idiots. We'll come back to that. Anyway, so I love this movie to death as a kid. I watch it over and over again. I know it intimately. I know all the dialogue. Oh yeah, one of the films I missed in my lineup of films at one point I said my favorite was Aladdin as well. I think Aladdin was what directly replaced Basil as my that's my favorite movie. But it was Basil for a long time, and I loved this movie dearly. And for whatever reason, a period of time passed in my youth where I did not watch it, and then I became a bit afraid of sitting down to watch it again because I had such fond memories of the film. But when I thought about what I remembered the film being, I was like, I don't think that doesn't sound good. That doesn't. I think young Dan might have been tricked by, shiny object, colours and sounds. And I was convinced that young me had been an idiot and that maybe the film was quite bad. And I almost didn't want to have that taken away in a weird way. So it's kind of sat as a question mark. And, the minute we started doing this podcast, this film was in my mind as a thing we would ultimately get to. And my fear, so much so that it's taken us, however many, 100 and 200, whatever number we're on now, 150, 160 episodes in, wherever we're up to, and I still hadn't chose it until this moment, which tells you how much I was afraid of watching this movie. So yeah, that's kind of my history and what and where I ended up with like choosing it for this one. I will say that the watching it again came with the second caveat of I assumed that because this came from that weird Disney 80s dark era, it's like post Walt Disney dying but pre the Renaissance. This movie is kind of I always kind of assumed this movie was just kind of one of those weird like Disney fuck ups, basically, that just like before they figured it out, before Little Mermaid comes along and the Renaissance begins, Oliver and Company, The Black Cauldron, Basil, these three movies I see from different times a little bit, but like I see them as being part of that same weird dark era of Disney when they hadn't quite figured out how to make movies again. So I didn't really realize that Basil actually in many ways was the start of the Renaissance, for reasons we'll get into. And I had the both pleasure and displeasure of realizing that this movie would have quite a lot of trivia. And I didn't, I had my whole evening ahead of me, I thought. 4.5 hours later, I was done with the trivia. It took a long time. So yeah, it's, I both had the thoughts of the film to contend with, and then just sifting through the history of the film. Anyway, I don't know if we start with you or me because I just talked a lot. Let's start with just your overall thoughts. So you come to this brand new. You are a 2026 human being that has never seen or barely knows what this movie is, sitting down to watch it for the first time. I assume you didn't check out a trailer or read a synopsis. I assume you just literally hit play, which is a fascinating way to come across this movie. What was your experience overall?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was very pleasant. I thought it was a lot of fun. It's one of those instances, that we have sometimes on this podcast where I don't feel like I have a huge amount to say either way. Do you know what I mean? Like, either critical or non. But did I have a good time? Yeah, I absolutely did. I think one of the main reasons I had a good time is the surprise of it being Sherlock Holmes, but a mouse.
Yes.
And I don't know how much fun children would have with this, but I had a lot of fun as a 2026 adult spotting the Sherlock Holmes references and thinking they were quite clever and quite fun. Like, I love the violin playing in the house, and obviously the notion that maybe it's actually, the mouse has taken on the main house's owner, and actually Sherlock exists in the world as well. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, he seems to. I mean, the guy, we hear him talking, and it seems to be Sherlock, and he seems to have a Watson. So I like the idea of the implausibility of this is a proper classic Disney. Don't think about it too hard movie. Like in Cars, where you go like, who made the cars? Where are the people? This is one of those. Like, there is a Sherlock Holmes in this universe, and the mouse that lives in his house has taken on his personality. And in the little mouse underworld is Sherlock Holmes. And then the Queen in Buckingham Palace has a mouse living in her place, and she's queen of the mice. Don't think about it.
Yeah. But I think that's a fun idea. I think that's fun, and like I thought the story raced along at a nice pace. I thought the child mouse was really sweet and endearing, and like when she loses her dad in the beginning, I found that quite powerful. That's slight spoiler talk there, but that happens literally right away.
That's the opening scene.
I think the final scenes of not the final scenes, but the plot wrap up is quick, is really quick and really fast done. But I'm sort of like there's a moment watching this movie where I went, swear, I'll say fudging instead. We've not accidentally sworn yet, so I'll say fudging. Where I went, fudging hell, they're doing Sherlock Holmes: The Final Problem. They're emulating him falling off the cliff and having a fall. And if you'd have said to me, turning on this movie, it's going to be a Sherlock Holmes mouse movie to the extent that they're going to do The Final Problem, which for those that don't know is the original last story of Sherlock Holmes, and
before
most adaptations, Robert Downey Jr., the Robert Downey movies have a version of it. The Benedict Cumberbatch series has a version of it. So it's very iconic. So, and there's all these. Then there's other references. So, I I had a good time, and I think one of the reasons I had a good time was the surprise of and the fun of it being a Sherlock spoof. In terms of character story, my main thing is I think the conclusion to the sort of tale, excuse the pun, was a bit rushed.
Not excused.
And actually, even to some degree, the revelation of like what the plan was is a bit like, huh, like, but none of those things outweighed things for me to not have a good time. I found it very pleasant, very endearing. And yeah, had a good time. I know I keep repeating that, but that's not me saying I think it's the best film we've ever watched on here. Certainly not the worst film we've ever watched on here. It's literally like, oh yeah, that was fun, cool. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah,
because you obviously had a lot more at stake watching it.
Yeah, I did, and it was really weird as well because the second the opening music hit, it was like a scene from The Matrix. I suddenly the whole movie flashed in front of me. Like the second the opening music hits and the first few images of the movie, it all came back to me. Like from start to end, I suddenly just remembered all the movie. Like remarkable, very strange physical experience that I had there when that happened. Like my actual brain just like went and just fast forwarded through the movie in my mind. I was like, oh my God, I remember all of this out of nowhere. And I remember parts. Like if you'd have asked me and forced me to say like before I watched it, like, what's the plot and what's this? And I'd have put pieces together, but it was quite extraordinary to have it all come back to me in such a rush in that moment. In terms of my, how I felt about it watching it now, I'll be honest with you, I fucking loved it. Like I really, and look, I have to say, this will undoubtedly be nostalgia tainted. It's impossible when a film was this important to my childhood for me to be able to completely separate that. I'm trying to be as objective as I can, and I hope to be able to back up the reason I enjoyed the film with things adult Dan noticed that young Dan definitely didn't notice. Sorry. I'm hoping to be able to support my position that the film is really good with, the review here. But the overarching feeling was the tone of the movie and the focus on character growth, but not the really sort of overt character growth audiences have become used to, but more subtle character growth. We're not hanging a hat on. We're not shaking the audience and going, look, this is the moment in which his growth happens, this exact second. And while that is often how storytelling works for many reasons, this movie is so artfully put together and so thoroughly understands Sherlock as a character that it managed to put quite a complex character thing into a Disney movie. And I'm sitting there watching it going, wait a minute, how is this a Disney hero? Basil is so unlikely. And it's because it's a Sherlock adaptation, I accept. It's not like they sat down and went, let's create a really unique Disney character, one of the most unusual Disney protagonists ever. Because Disney protagonists, generally speaking, are the least interesting characters in their movies. Like, I don't want to be that guy, but I'm not even going to pick up. I'm not going to pick. I'll pick on one that we've already reviewed and everyone knows I love, so it doesn't sound like I'm hating on some random Disney movie. Aladdin's not the most interesting character in Aladdin. Right? He's just not. Right? He is on an arc, for sure, and a clever one that they've crafted and, goes through the proper beats as the story goes on and he progresses through it. But he is not a particularly interesting character. He's mostly a noble guy trying to do his best, and you know what he's going to do stepping into every scene, basically. But Basil, the hero of this movie, is immediately introduced to a small child who has lost her father, and he could not give a shit. I'm watching it going like, is this for real? Even if you'd have challenged my memory of it, I would have said, he must show some empathy. It's a Disney movie. I know he's a Sherlock adaptation, essentially, but they're not going to do that in a Disney movie where he's that cold. Nope. He doesn't give a single flying, I'll copy Chris, a single flying fudge about this child until he discovers she's part of the mystery he's already obsessing over. And that is so bold for a Disney movie from this era. He does not care about anything. And it makes him really interesting. And I wonder, is the reason Child Dan is so attracted to this movie because it's so different from anything else that was being produced at the time? It's dark. It's tonally. Go on.
I just think you're giving, like, look, you could well be right, but I think you're giving Child Dan a lot of credit there. I think Adult Dan is doing a little lift in there.
No, but I mean,
Child Dan could have just liked the fun visuals and the fucking talking mouse. I ruined it, and the fudge and talking mouth. Mouse, sorry.
That's absolutely true. But there were a huge number of movies that I could have chosen. I mean, The Rescuers, which is another movie about detective mice that was animated, came out a few years, but I was drawn to this one, and I wonder if part of that is because the characters are so interesting and the tone is so... I think I'm going to lean more on tone for young Dan. This movie doesn't feel like any other Disney animated movie from this era, or any era, really. I can't think of a single Disney movie that opens with a jump scare, for a start, and a really quite scary scene of a small child having their father kidnapped. Like, the movie is dark. Like, dark. And that's really surprising. And I ponder if it set itself apart from its competition. And that's what made it stick out, because it was so different to everything else. And I could be wrong. Maybe that is it. Maybe it is just it's the fun mouse movie. Where he wears a silly hat and runs around.
No,
with a giant dog.
But you know, who knows? Neither of us can say, and you have more ability to say than I do because you are Dan.
No, and I did, and I believe I did preface it with language that would imply I was speculating. Maybe this is why young Dan was drawn more to this film.
I just thought it was amusing.
But like, I just I couldn't get over on this rewatch how brilliant this film is at characterizing people and doing something unique with the characterization and doing something different with the tone and the action. This is not like any other Disney movie that came before it, and it's not like many of the ones that followed it either. To this day, I don't think there are many movies, full stop, that have the tone and the approach that this movie does. And I in a world where I'd say, I don't know, I don't want to give a figure on this, but like a huge percentage of kids' movies are either echoing other kids' movies or just outright copying each other. It's pretty strong. It's happening a lot. Like, we're seeing a lot of cookie cutter kids' movies now, where it's like that's the same movie, but now it's set here instead of here, or these characters have had this one change or whatever. But like it's truly unique kids' movies are few and far between, and I think this is definitely one of them, and I was very impressed by that. And it's also really entertaining, and it's super short and snappy. It's clear all the voice actors are having a ton of fun. The music is glorious, the visuals are great, and the action's really thrilling. There are criticisms. There are things I would like to talk about that I didn't care for in the movie, but if we're just doing overall thoughts, and we're not getting into like the details, because to talk about some of those criticisms, I've got to go into some more detail. But I would say on the whole, this movie is knocking it out of the park. I think this is a really, really great movie. And I'm thrilled that that's still the case. Thrilled that that is still the case. So yeah, I had a good old time. Definitely going to be... look, especially if you've got kids, this is a big recommend. Why not, right? Like...
it's great. It's great fun.
It's an hour and 15
let's go
minutes.
into... Yeah. So it's... there are TV pilots that are longer.
Yeah. And it's on Disney Plus, which, let's be honest, if you've got kids, you have. Like there's no way they don't have their Bluey fix. So you've got Disney Plus. So there's no reason not to show them this.
I would obviously wholeheartedly recommend the movie as well. So let's go into spoiler talk, because you're absolutely right about Basil. And what I love is they don't really. He arguably he has an arc in that, especially when it comes to Dawson, who is the Watson of the movie. He asks him to stay, and investigate with him and stuff. And obviously, Olivia, is it the young mouse girl? She gives him a big hug at the end, which I was kind of like, when that happened, I was like, you're not going to hug Dawson? Like, if I were you, I'd be way more inclined to, like, give Dawson a big hug. He's the one that's really, like, been there for you unquestionably. But Basil doesn't, he saves her, and that's a great moment, and there are moments of him saving the girl. He does absolutely care by the end of the movie. That is emphatic, but they don't change his character. His whole character and personality hasn't changed necessarily by the end of the movie, and I think they really walked an excellent tightrope on that, and didn't betray the Sherlock Holmes archetypes with that. It was almost as if the world around him changed, and he changed a bit as well. But he's still himself. Although I suppose he is very warm to the woman who comes in with the problem. But arguably, you could make an argument that's because the case that was hounding him has been resolved and has been concluded. So yes, of course, he's moving on to the next adventure. So, yeah, I think Basil's characterization is really interesting, and I share your view that it's very unique as well.
Well, now we're in spoilers, I would like to talk a little bit more about Basil's arc, because I was struck with how they showed his growth in a, less overt way than other movies of this nature. And maybe it's time constraints, because this was originally planned to be a 90-minute movie and they reduced it to its current runtime. It might just be an accident. This might be a Donnie Darko situation where they were forced to do things a bit more quickly, and that has left key parts of what existed as his arc out, and therefore what we're left with is the flavor of the arc without the actual physical, here's a moment where we're seeing him make a different choice, and we're going to make a point of, Basil, you've grown as a person. But I think what's really fun about the way they've structured this, Dawson is, I would argue, more empathetic than Watson in any incarnation I'm aware of is. Now, Watson's an empathetic person, but I wonder if Watson always seems more empathetic next to Holmes. He's, anyone that, with any shred of humanity is going to seem more empathetic next to Sherlock Holmes. I think that is just fact, right? And he's a doctor, so he obviously cares about people, and he obviously makes those sorts of choices. But Dawson seems to be able to be willing to throw he'd throw his whole life away for that little girl, and you feel that. And the first thing we see is Dawson comes across that little girl, and he is immediately empathizing with her, giving up whatever he's up to try and help her. He doesn't just go, okay, well, I'm going to take you to the police and leave you there. He's like, let's find this Basil, let's do it together. And he comforts her, and he gets the umbrella, and he's like, let's do this together. And he takes her off. And then we meet Basil, and Basil is the opposite of that. And what I think's lovely about the way they've done this characterization is Dawson is what changes Basil. And I think at the end of the movie, the idea is Basil recognizes that. He recognizes he's better with empathy. Because in the end, when he's in the mousetrap and he's all sad and he's all woe is me, Basil's whole speech, if you're listening to what he's specifically talking about, is about being outsmarted. He's depressed because he's been beaten, not because a child has been kidnapped. Again. Or that the Queen's going to be taken over. There's the scene in the toy store where the child is kidnapped the previous time, and Basil's like, he got away again, we'll have to keep going. And then he realizes the girl is not there, and that Dawson is sad about this. And he's not particularly sad about this, but Dawson is, and he comforts Dawson in a very bad, sort of I don't know how to deal with this human emotion stuff way. But then we get to the scene with the mousetrap, and he's going on about being outsmarted. And if you listen to then what Dawson says before he snaps out of it, it's, Basil, you're not going... I believe you can help the girl. I believe you can help us. I believe you can help the Queen, because the Queen's in danger. We'll talk about it in a minute. But the bad guy's plan is to sort of kidnap the Queen and replace her with a robot. It's a very silly movie. A toy version of herself that's basically a robot. And I think by having that as the arc, Basil doesn't care for the girl, but he's into the mystery. Basil focused on the mystery, not paying attention to the girl, doesn't even realize that she's been kidnapped after the toy store sequence. Has that conversation with Dawson when he's at his lowest, because he's been outsmarted by the villain. And then his subsequent outsmarting of the villain at the palace, where he chooses to save her over beating the villain in the clock tower. Sorry, Nadia just brought me a cup of tea. Thank you, Nadia. So after the palace sequence, we go to the clock tower sequence where he has a moment where the little girl is going to be squished, and you feel a little bit like hyper-focused, want to beat Ratigan Basil wouldn't even notice she was in danger. Not being a bad person, just being completely focused on this one thing. But he's well aware of where she is in the sequence. He leaves Ratigan to save her. He makes a choice. Again, the movie doesn't hang a hat on it, doesn't make a big point of it, but it is something that I noticed happened. And it feels like to me, by the end of the movie, what he's learned is he's better with some empathy. And Dawson is the character bringing that to him. And that's why, in the end, while it is thin and it is very quick, and I might be doing a lot of fansplaining here, because again, the movie does it, in my opinion, so subtly. If someone told me they didn't think it was there, I wouldn't disagree with them. But I genuinely read it, in the end, as the reason he asked Dawson to stay isn't just, oh, I'd like a friend. It's he sees himself as being more complete and better with that empathy that Dawson clearly has in spades, and he feels like he can learn from him. And I just thought that was a wonderful little arc for him, even if again it's not completely laid out. I do think it is I do think my theory is supported in the text, but I don't think it's outright laid out so solidly. Again, that if somebody said they didn't think that's really what was there enough or clear enough, that I wouldn't. Yeah, I'd struggle to disagree or criticize that point. But yeah, I don't know. I talked a long time there, but I had the Basil's arc has been the thing I've mostly been thinking about since I watched this movie yesterday. So I'm glad I got to expel all of my thoughts on that because that's been the primary thing I've been thinking about.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's both subtle but also very clear. I think when watching it, I really really enjoyed that element, and I loved the character of Dawson as well.
Yeah,
like you say, maybe more empathetic than often Watson is portrayed.
Yeah.
But I love that element, and fundamentally, our way into this story is a little girl who's lost her father. So
yes.
you do want to see that empathy. It's it helps it still feel like a Disney movie if some of it is not a lot darker than you would usually get for that. What's your view then? And I'll intro it a little bit because you just said you felt you talked a lot there, but I just thought the third act, like not necessarily the scenes afterwards, the scene where we set up that Dawson is going to hang around and we set up that the little girl and her father are safe, all of those scenes in Baker Street I think play out really well and are as you talked about then, and enough of a conclusion to arcs and the story. But it felt like the time between, okay, the plan is a robot queen who's going to appoint Rat Moriarty as the chief or something or other. The time between that sort of reveal and then specifically, I think, them escaping the mouse traps. And then so what happens is, for those that don't remember, that haven't rewatched it, and again, I would really recommend you do rewatch it, or watch it for the first time, rather, excuse me. They get... Basil and Dawson are in and everyone else are in a trap, and they get out of that trap, and that's as with all the visuals in the movie, that's animated really well and is a fun sequence.
Yes.
So they get out and then they go. That
is my favorite. My favorite joke in the whole movie is that Ratigan went to the trouble of recording a farewell song to play to taunt Basil as he died in that trap.
Yeah.
Fucking the most ridiculous thing. Good. I love it so much. Yeah, go on, sorry.
It was very good. So then Basil was what's his name again?
Ratigan.
Ratigan's flown out a chimney and gone off to Buckingham Palace.
Yes.
And then so Basil and Dawson, etc., and the little girl escape the trap. And then they go after Rattigan, and we don't really know how, considering Rattigan's flown out a chimney, but okay, whatever. They go after Rattigan, and then Rattigan's plan is unfolding, and then there's a bit of commotion, and we peep backstage, and basically the gang is there, and they've caught them. Like, there's no sort of big, I don't know, big battle particularly, or it just kind of felt a bit quick. The conclusion to that side of the plot felt a bit, Rattigan's won. Oh no, he hasn't. It just, to me, felt like we needed some extra beats, like another few minutes or something like that, or maybe even the moment where, because we have Basil go, "Oh, isn't it obvious there's a problem in Buckingham Palace," or whatever he says, but we don't really, unless I've missed it, see Basil go, "Well, this is clearly his plan because of this, this, and this." I think maybe that's it as well. There's no, for a Sherlock Holmes story,
no mystery.
There's no final, this is the mystery, this is how I figured it out. Like, when they're caught backstage even, maybe. Well, I knew this was your plan for these reasons.
Yeah.
And we have a bit of, like, Sherlock investigating and doing that sort of thing earlier on. So it's not like that's not in the movie and wouldn't have fitted in that moment. So I guess maybe it's missing those things, and quite specifically for me, they're suddenly there at Buckingham Palace and they've suddenly saved the day. We don't even really see them save the day. It's like they've saved the day behind the curtain, and then the dad is changing the dialogue that is coming out of the fake Queen's mouth, and suddenly Rattigan looks behind him and they've saved the day and he's lost. I just think that specifically happens pretty quickly.
Yeah, so there's a few things I'd like to sort of jump off on from that, because I think you very astute. I think you're exactly right. The first thing I'd say is it's very unusual to do a Sherlock story where we know who the villain is and we know who committed the crime just out the gate. Like, there's never a who did this element of it. So it's a Sherlock story without a sort of whodunit element, which is unusual. Unraveling the mystery is more sort of like, what's his plan? And what you're right, it is missing is Sherlock, Basil in this case, doesn't figure out. He does figure out the plan, but that sort of happens off screen because we, the audience, already at that point know what the plan is. And the movie is quite good at giving clues as to what his plan is. Often the movie will ask the question of why might he need a toy maker. He makes references to, the royalty and stuff in the movie. There's little crumbs of information throughout the movie. His plan doesn't come out of nowhere, as ridiculous as it is and terrible as his plan is, which, to clarify, his plan is to robot replace the Queen and then have her bestow powers onto him. It's very strange. It's a weird plan. But you're right, there is definitely a beat missing there. And I suspect it was in the original version of this movie they planned to make before the budget got cut, which we'll get to later. Budget and time, massive cuts. And I think you're exactly right. I think you very astutely noticed a missing beat to the movie, which is Basil figuring it out and then sort of thwarting specifically the plan. Because we do spend the time resolving the plot of Basil has to outwit and defeat Rattigan, because that's what we then do. Once Rattigan's plan has sort of fallen apart, we then spend a lot of time with the chase and the clock tower and the Rhinebeck Falls, the final problem element, which is all brilliantly done and given a lot of, a decent amount of time and works really well. But yeah, you're right. Basil escapes, and then it feels like we learn what Rattigan's plan is. Basil escapes. The plan has been foiled, and it happens in like what feels like 30 seconds. I'm sure it's probably longer than that, but it feels very quick. There's definitely no real defense to that. That is definitely what the movie does. I would say, though, if I was in their shoes and I was prioritizing which sequence to lose to keep, and this is obviously, I'm adding context from my research that you won't have had, Chris, so it's an absolutely valid criticism. I'm not saying that this makes it okay that the movie does that, but just for some extra context, I suspect that they were forced to choose which scenes to keep and which to cut, and as a result, I wouldn't want to lose the toy store. I wouldn't want to lose the escaping the trap, and I wouldn't want to lose the final chase. So if something's got to go from that third act, or from late second act, to make some time and save some money because the action sequence is the thing you cut. Basil being like, I know what the plan is and this is how we're going to foil it, and him doing whatever sequence of events presumably were originally planned to happen. I could see why that was the thing they chose to cut, but I fully agree with you. It's a problem. It does feel like the movie, like in the old days, they used to have the movies on reels. It does feel a bit like somebody missed a reel, like they accidentally like skipped from reel 7 to reel 9, and reel 8 was just like lost to time, and we just jumped to, oh yeah, all the bad guys are wrapped up and we foiled Ratigan. And now onto the chase. It's extremely quick. That's definitely, I think, what would have been in it if it had been its original runtime, though, for sure. But I fully agree. It is an issue. The other thing was there something else you talked about that I wanted to sort of pick out? I can't remember now. It'll come back to me. So yeah, I fully agree with that feeling. Before we get back to some of the more serious stuff, Chris, I want to ask you your feelings on the sequence that maybe could have been cut, which is the I don't know what to call it. Do you call it the cabaret, the sort of burlesque sequence? I mean, it's not quite burlesque, but the
I forgot about
the weird sort of dancing mice singing a saucy song. I'll say right now that young Dan. I had no context for that scene other than the joke of it, which is, for those who don't remember, Dawson is drugged, and there's this very comical moment when Basil, who sniffs out that it's that there's something in his drink, doesn't down it, but Dawson does, and he's like, Dawson, we've got to find a clue or whatever, and then the camera pans around and Dawson is now on the stage, dancing with the cabaret girls. It's really funnily done, and it works. That's perfect comedy because it's character comedy. That's only funny because we've spent half a movie with Dawson at this point, and we know that's very out of character for him. You know what I mean? Like, he's this very sweet, lovable character, and seeing him act like, like Bugs Bunny seeing a female bunny with his eyes popping out, and like, you know what I mean? Like a very cartoonish sort of like woo sort of situation. That's very funny because it's so out of character. But the actual scene itself is probably, as an adult, I'll put this as mildly as I can. It's deeply uncomfortable. It's not a fun watch. It's a good song, and it's in of itself, it's a good scene. It's just not appropriate for the movie's audience, I don't think. I don't know. It felt out of place to me. Felt weird.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's sort of bizarre, kind of like you said, the imagery is very dark, and there are. I think that's also what I mean by me being like in general throughout the movie. I mean, but this scene is the biggest example. To that wider point of even my sort of review for someone with no nostalgia of this movie was I enjoyed the Sherlock Holmes references, etc. I'm not sure how that would work for a child, and I think throughout the movie, this movie really works for me in my position, but I don't know. It would be odd, I think, showing this to a small child, and that scene in particular, especially when, like, literally, it's again, it's burlesque, I suppose. I don't know, like, but
I think cabaret. I think the word is I think officially this would be because I think burlesque does involve actual stripping, whereas this is cabaret, which is like girls in quite skimpy outfits performing.
Okay, is she wearing as many clothes by the end of the dance as she was when she first came on stage?
I think probably so, yeah. I assume.
No, she comes on in quite a my memory, unless I've made it up in my head, which I'd need to speak to a therapist about. But my memory is she comes on in quite like a covered outfit, sings the opening of the song, and then it's ba da ba da ba ba ba, and suddenly she's got flipping suspenders on. I hope I'm not making that up, but that is what happens.
That truly might be it. But yeah, I still think this would come more under cabaret than burlesque. I think in the end in burlesque, don't they actually strip down to nothing? They've got like I don't know. I don't ask an idiot like me who knows nothing about either thing to know the difference between cabaret and burlesque. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm gonna Google it very carefully while we talk.
Either way, I think yes, you could. I don't think that scene is adding enough to the to the plot to justify his existence. And yes, maybe if you're looking for cuts, you cut that scene.
Yeah. Okay,
sure.
okay. So they're often used interchangeably and frequently combined, but cabaret and burlesque are distinct performance styles. Cabaret is generally defined by its intimate variety show format focused on song, music, and social satire. Burlesque is a theatrical form of artful teasing that uses dance, humor, and costumes to exaggerate or celebrate themes of sensuality and femininity. Okay. I guess it's cabaret because she's singing. Like it's a performance. I guess that puts it under cabaret based on that definition.
Yeah, I guess so. But either way, unnecessary.
Yeah, I know. I would agree. It is unnecessary, and I don't know if I would, in a world where we've already complained that there's a scene in the movie, that could have been neat, that would have been helped with more, like the jumping to, as you pointed out, the plan being foiled at a light speed. Do you sort of think like, maybe we do without the dance number, and then we could probably have used that money to make the scene or a version of a scene that sort of fills in that other gap later in the movie. There's always that question of like, maybe we could have snipped that and done something else. But they seem very attached to this song and this sequence.
Yeah, well, speaking of sequences, because as much as that sequence is like, and could be really taken out potentially, the building suspense and creepiness and almost horror of the toy store sequence is fantastic. Like, it's just the way that sequence unfolds, the sort of gentle hiding from the bat-like creature, the Basil wanting them to be quiet and creep around, the young girl Dawson getting distracted, the horror of like the dolls, and then when the bat thing sets off everything and everything starts going off, I thought that sequence was fantastic and very, very effective.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to my compliment about the tone of the movie, and that the movie is really, really like crazy confident in what it's doing, and it every scene is building on a previous scene. The reason I think that toy store sequence is so effective is because of the opening scene of the movie. So the opening scene of the movie, we get a jump scare with the bat, whose name I think is Fidget. I think the character's name is Fidget. He jump scares you at the beginning of the movie. Well, I mean, he didn't jump scare me because, like I said, I had a weird Matrix, I remember the entire movie, out of nowhere moment. So I was like, oh yeah, he's about to pop out and scare like the audience or whatever. But that is by definition a jump scare. It might not be the most effective jump scare you've ever seen. If you're a sort of person who watches horror movies, you might not have even registered it as a jump scare. But he bursts out of nowhere and scares the little girl, right? So when you're watching the toy store scene, there's a tension of he's going to jump out again. That bat is somewhere here. They're investigating that. He's about. And there's this just creeping tension. And because it's so beautifully animated and really well designed and really like visually dark as well as tonally dark, it all just sort of comes together in this really like just very purposeful way. You just feel a lot of artistry in this movie, like in every frame. It just feels like, while they didn't have a lot of time and a lot of money, and I know that I know this movie is famous for having a huge number of like weird little continuity errors, like objects appearing, disappearing, changing location between shots. I didn't notice a lot of it when I watched it on this occasion, but I know that's a thing this movie is kind of famous for having. And again, we'll come back to why we get to trivia. I think the care that what they decided to dedicate the time they had to make this movie and the money they had is to making it tonally what it should be. Everything between the visuals and the music and the storytelling is all working with a singular goal. And when filmmaking works this well and everything sort of comes together in such a brilliant way, you do end up with these really effective scenes. And that toy store sequence is incredibly done and was an absolute delight to watch. And when you think about the two major set pieces of this film, the sort of the chase to Big Ben and the clock tower sequence in the cogs and all that stuff, and this, it's like, wow, this movie it's like an hour and 14 minutes long, and it has these two crazy memorable, big bombastic, heavily animated, like not action sequences as such, but essentially, that do like a big, tension thing and then pay it off in a really exciting way. And like then you go like, well, it's okay. That's two quite huge sequences. What's the rest of the movie? Well, the rest of the movie is this delightful, charming little character piece about this weird perfectionist detective that doesn't seem to have any empathy and learns to love. You know, it just seems like it's kind of the amount of stuff this movie has and does well in its 1 hour and 14-minute runtime is kind of remarkable. Like the more I think about it, the more I think this movie is some sort of miracle.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what it achieves, like you say, for only 74 minutes is maddening. And do you think it's because I mean fundamentally it's and like you know we're this is a random one, but we're gonna soon for MBS, Nothing But Static, our main podcast. We're gonna be reviewing the revival series of Scrubs, and the revival series of Malcolm in the Middle as well. Both of those shows on an episode by episode basis, and this isn't a criticism, by the way. I actually think these two shows do this very well, but both of those shows are juggling arguably more characters than this movie is juggling.
Yes,
this movie is essentially juggling 5 characters, 6 if you count the dad. Yep. So that's why it's achieving all of these things, because actually it's not. It's zeroing in. It's not trying to tell a massive story. Now you could argue that also maybe is why the end feels a bit rushed, because you don't really feel the weight of the threat because we've not felt any time with it, spent any time with it. But that's actually not also what the movie's about. The movie is about, you know, Basil's trying to get Rattigan and the little girl's trying to get to her father. And the movie does those plots very, very well. So I think the reason it achieves so much, like you say, in only 74 minutes is because actually it achieves so much, but everything is servicing one thing and everything is focused on one thing. I've drawn this comparison on the podcast before and said it before, but it is the magic trick of Spider-Man No Way Home that not enough people are talking about, where that movie actually... a lot happens and it's dealing with a lot of characters, but they are all in service of the story of Tom Holland's Peter Parker. Like they are all servicing that, and therefore, even though there's a lot on the wall, you never feel the weight of that. Even though there are some characters that we don't actually spend that much time with, but we don't care or don't mind because the time that we do spend with them is all servicing one thing, so it all feels very complete. And I think that's exactly the same with this movie as well.
Yeah, and I think that goes into the design of Rattigan as a villain as well, because he's one of those... Look, it's a very traditional thing to do, but he's one of those classic Disney villains where he might as well be saying, well, the thing about me is I'm evil. Like, that's... The thing about me is I'm the bad guy. Like, no need for nuance, no need for a tragic backstory, no need for, in this case, you know... he's actually got a point. Like, and I'm not saying movies that do that are bad. By the way, I love that. I love a villain with a point. But for the purposes of this particular story, Rattigan is just evil. Full stop. That's it. That's the thing about him. And because they've decided not to make. They deliberately chosen not to make him a 3-dimensional character. That's not fair. It's not that he's not 3-dimensional, but to not make him like a character that goes on an arc or grows or changes in any way. Because he is the thing he is, and he is that thing throughout the runtime. That means we can focus on Basil and Dawson and Olivia. That gives us the power to focus on those characters and their journey instead. And it's just a super smart choice. So I think it's the design of things. The choice to not make this like a whodunit mystery also helps with that, because we don't have to spend a bunch of the movie hiding what really happened. We get to see it and explore it. And it's, while for other stories, choosing to make it a mystery would be the right choice to create complexity and intrigue, for a kids' film, let's focus on the character stuff and let's make the story as straightforward as we can manage it. And it is a really good example of we talk about this a lot, and I hate to bring it up again, but the Matt Stone and Trey Parker, the South Park guys, did that thing about, like, if you take your story and put it out beat by beat, if between every beat you can write the words "and then," you've probably fucked up. It's probably not got a very compelling story. You need this happens, therefore this happens, because this happens, which leads to this happening. You don't want it to say this happens and then this happens and then this happens. You need the story to feel like it has thrust, and this movie has thrust. Like the dad is kidnapped, therefore the little girl goes looking for Basil. She meets Dawson, and that brings them together on their new thing so therefore they're going to go find Basil together. They find Basil, his goal is aligned with theirs, so they decide together to go after Radigan. Like, it's just like everything seems to lead to each thing. Every choice that they're making is for a reason. And I think it's just really brilliantly done. And I think that's just a testament to a really well written and designed story. Truly, yeah. I was absolutely packed with like
I could
just surprisingly clever choices. On the surface, you could watch this movie and go, yeah, it's like a simple kids film. There's a couple of good gags, there's some nice visuals, whatever. But like, I think the minute I was really thinking about this movie, I was like, no, there's a lot of really deliberate choices made here. There's a lot of artistry on display here that you might not appreciate at a glance. But the storytelling is actually quite superb.
There's also a lot of literal artistry on display as well. Like
Yeah.
the big cat, the dog, like the sequences, the trap sequence, the robotic queen sequence at the end whilst rushed. All of these things. The animation is really great. the design, the drawings, the art is fantastic.
And there's a lot of really cool visual things for the tone too. Like, so when we first meet Olivia and her dad, and they're in his toy shop or whatever it is that he owns together, it's bright and inviting and warm. And then she gets trapped in a little cupboard while the fight happens, and we hear it happening, and we're very much from her perspective. We can't see what's going on. We get glimpses. But when she comes out, the light's been broken, and the change that makes, it's now dark and cold and scary. And they're communicating all that with a simple lighting change. And, some people would argue, yeah, well, that's like standard filmmaking stuff, that they made it physically darker to represent that. But but they did really well. Like, it's done beautifully. Like, it still looks incredible, but they've made this really maybe obvious to some, and particularly in the 80s, keep in mind that some of this film language is still being developed. This was not like necessarily as commonplace as maybe it is as a standard trick to make the scene seem darker now. But yeah, when she comes out and the whole color palette has shifted to this blue, this really dark, uninviting, cold blue. Like, it's just a really well done thing, and it's super smart and works very effectively, and you do feel really sad for the girl. And the movie definitely does a good job of evoking all your feelings. I will say, as a small criticism, though, we're talking about the animation just briefly. Somebody please go back in time, invent a time machine, and go back in time and please show the animators of this movie what a crumpet looks like. I would appreciate that. Thank you very much. Because that's a fucking muffin.
That was bizarre.
That's a fucking muffin.
Yeah, I think there are better uses for time travel. But if you want to prioritize that, that's up to you.
Priority numero uno.
Well, let's more than ever hope Dan doesn't invent a time machine. I thought the music as well throughout.
So good.
Great score.
Oh,
really,
what a
really,
good score!
Really great score.
Fucking
Atmospheric. Adds to the atmosphere you were describing the visuals creating then.
Yeah.
Adds to the tension and the triumph. I really all the things you would say. Imagine you've gone to ChatGPT and said, say a load of positive things about a score, and insert those here because it's fantastic.
Yeah, I truly love that moment. Not that moment, that opening and that main theme hitting as we go into it. Like I said, that for me that was a really bizarre experience, because obviously the second that music hit, it brought back all the memories. But it's hard for me to know objectively if it's good music or if it's just music I'm very familiar with. So I'm actually really glad you've talked about the score, because I loved the score, and that's something that really could be nostalgia fueled, that feeling. I have no objective metric to tell you that this is good music, because it gave me the feelings I was supposed to have during each scene. But was that just nostalgia? I have no idea. But I'm glad you also appreciate the music, because I thought it was very good.
I think like last week as well. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go on.
But I think like last week, it absolutely ripe for a sequel. Like presumably, like the logistics of the film and its circumstances. I know we're going to go into in the triv, but and maybe that's part of it. But I mean, they absolutely set up a great scenario of I'd watch Basil and Dawson solve more crimes. I'd maybe like I say want to push the mystery side of it a bit more as opposed to the adventure side of it, which they pushed here. But that's a personal preference thing of just sort of enjoying mystery shows, I guess. But I absolutely could have taken more of this for sure.
Yeah, agreed.
It could even be as simple as Rattigan escapes, because Rattigan's he's captured, but he could easily get out, couldn't he? That seems fairly. It wouldn't be, if you want Rattigan back, it wouldn't be hard, and I would take another Rattigan movie. I'd probably prefer a completely different adventure, and like I say, more of a mystery. But I'd accept Rattigan coming back if need be.
Did he die? He fell off the clock. Is he not dead? Did we see him getting?
Oh yeah, you're right. Oh yeah, he did. Yeah. Sorry, you're absolutely right. Yeah, he did.
Falls off a clock.
He did die. Well,
if we're sticking to Sherlock, if we're sticking to Sherlock canon, I believe I could be misremembering this, but my memory is Sherlock comes back after the final problem, because there was a lot of pressure on Arthur Conan Doyle to bring the character back, and he eventually caved and did. But I don't believe he ever went back on the Moriarty of it all. I think Moriarty remained dead. I could be misremembering that, and I'm sorry if you're a big Sherlock buff out there and you're disappointed in my lack of Sherlock knowledge. I would actually say, though, this movie is probably, and I'm only just putting this together now, I read the Sherlock, a lot of the classic Sherlock novels quite young, and I'm now wondering if this movie is why. Because this movie does do a lot of classic Sherlock stuff, like the description of how when he meets Dawson and he knows he's a doctor and he knows he's been to Afghanistan. That's from A Study in Scarlet. That's
yeah, there's loads,
almost word for word.
And I love. Look, and I'm just making it a bit of a bit now, so I apologize to that. But I love the picture you're building of young Dan. The film finishes and you're like, oh my goodness, I loved how dark and different that was. That really appealed to me. Mother, could you bring me the Sherlock Holmes books? I want to delve more into this world.
Yeah. I mean, look, I like this little Stewie version of Dan you've created. I would argue that version of Dan would have rung a bell before saying it. Ding 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 ding, mother. Fetch me the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, please, immediately, post haste.
Yeah.
But I think the reality is presumably, I'll be completely honest here. Obviously, I don't know, but there was a period of time, about 2 or 3 years after this movie would have been in my regular rotation. So I watched this movie. I'm about 5. When I'm about 8 or 9, we live in Ireland, and every day my mum is at she works at a local cafe, and she picks me up from school when she finishes, but she finishes half an hour later than school does, so she can't come and get me. But luckily my school is next to the Roscommon Public Library, the library around the corner. Roscommon is the small town in Ireland I lived in at this age, so I would just go to the library after school every day. And while I never went, Mother, please fetch me the Sherlock Holmes, I think young me definitely went and wanted to read more about Sherlock. And look, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think 9-year-old Dan understood Sherlock Holmes. I think I probably tried and didn't care for it or didn't understand it, and then came back to it, maybe in my teens. But I was definitely interested in the character, and I'd never realized I'd never realized my interest, my desire to read something with Sherlock Holmes in it came from this movie until now. I'm literally putting that together because that's certainly when I'm in high school, I'm reading I started with the shorts and eventually read the novels, Hounds and Study in Scarlet, and I think I got to those. I do think there's a pretty clear lineage, even if it sounds ridiculous when you lay it out.
But weren't there? No. I think that makes complete sense. But weren't there Basil books as well? I thought I'd read somewhere.
So now
after looking at the poster and stuff like that,
wonder
after looking up the movie after watching it.
I have no memory of whether I've read these books or not, but it would not surprise me to know that, like, when I tried to get into Sherlock, and I went and tried to find the Sherlock books, it would not. If you told me I ended up stumbling across the proper Basil books and have read those, that would make a lot of sense. So for those who don't know, there's the Basil of Baker Street was a series of novels written in, well, they started in, I think, 58, and they went through till, I believe, the 80s, early 80s. I think, yeah, so there you go, I've got it. So Eve Titus published the first book in the Basil Baker Street series in 1958, and she published 5 books in total between 58 and 82. So, it's very plausible that I stumbled across the books at some point. I don't physically remember that, but because I was at the library every day, I read a lot of books. Do you know what I mean? Like, books became quite disposable to young Dan. Like, it was like I would take it, I would read it for for half an hour while I wait for my mum. Then I would take it home, finish it either overnight or over 2 nights, and then just take it back a couple of days later. Like, I read a lot of books very quickly, and I remember being questioned by the librarian because she did not believe I had read one of the books I brought back. And I had to, like, she jokingly quizzed me. she was like, you got this out yesterday? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, did you read it? I'm like, yeah. And she flips to the back of the book and she's like, what does this character do after this happens? And I'm like, oh, he this. And she's like, okay, yeah, fine. I remember that distinctly. That's very funny. I'd forgotten about that.
That librarian is it's going above and beyond. I would argue, not in a good way.
Yeah,
I don't think she needs to make that a responsibility of hers.
In a Dickens story, she's the villain.
Yeah, for sure. So just to clarify, and I know we've probably done this before in Rewind Reviews / Dan's autobiography, but the grandma with the video store, that's in the UK.
That's after, yeah. That's after this. Yeah. That's when we moved back to the UK at the age of 11. So a couple of years later, I moved back to the UK.
So to build a picture, you've got half an hour after school, and you're going to the library all the time. You move to the UK, the library gets replaced with a video shop. You end up watching a load of videos, and you become the person you are today.
100%.
That
is the Dan origin story. 100%. I was well read until the age of 11, and a video store ruined me.
No, you read a lot more. You read more than I do now. I need to read more. That's a separate thing. But yeah, you're still, I would argue, very well read.
I think there are a lot of people who are genuinely very well read that would disagree with you.
Well, yeah, of course. There's levels. There's levels, but you're not.
Yeah. That's funny to think about. But no, but that's 100% my origin story. You can literally trace it from, like, I'm in Ireland, I'm in a situation where I'm visiting a library every day just out of necessity. I read a lot, and then I go to the UK, we move back, we're briefly living with my nana before we find a place of our own, but I'm hanging out at that video store an awful lot, and then, that's I become the weird little movie TV kid.
Who we love and adore, Dan. I don't have any other notes for this movie, do you?
Let me quickly.
Oh, and by the way, sorry, my laptop loaded up while you were talking a minute ago, so apologies for anyone that heard a massive apologies.
I didn't hear that at all. A quick note on the cast. I mean, look, obviously Vincent Price in one of his last performances is just staggering as Rattigan. It's just incredible. But I mean, he's just, sometimes you just know someone is having fun. And I believe that Vincent Price was having fun in every breath of this performance, and it comes through on screen, and it's delightful. But everyone else is great too. Barry Ingram is Basil, wonderful. Val Bettin is Dawson, great as well. And little, I'm gonna check this name. I don't know this girl's name. Suzanne Polashek, who voices Olivia. Again, we talked about this quite recently. It's very easy for a child actor to be shit. I'm sorry, it just is. Then they don't have the skill or the training that an adult actor does, and if you get it wrong, you end up with the first Harry Potter movie. And the irony of that is all three of those performers turned out to be, grew into talented actors. In their own rights. So like that's not shade, that's just they were children. But sometimes you get a performance from a child that is just, pitch perfect, brilliant, exactly what it needs to be, where they're sort of charming and not annoying and all that stuff, and that is Olivia 100%. Like she's so well performed in this movie. You have all of the empathy for her that the characters do because of how well she's performed. So for sure, genius, great casting.
Yeah, fantastic. The cast all around casting was great.
Do I have any other notes? Oh, the little disguises they wear when they go to the bar are great, and I love that Basil is wearing a quick change back into his normal outfit, but Dawson isn't. So Dawson spends the rest of the movie as a sort of like weird belly dancing pirate. With the crop top, ill-fitting shirt. It's a very good gag. What else? I really like the joke that Basil, that Rattigan is disappointed Basil didn't work it out where he was quicker, and that now because he's 15 minutes late, he's not going to get to watch Basil die himself. So he sets up a camera to take a picture of the moment Basil dies. It's such a great bit of characterization for Rattigan because like he is putting his evil plan over his personal desire to see Basil die, the way that Basil is putting his thwarting of Rattigan over the goal of looking after Olivia and doing right by her. And it's such a funny moment that it leads to, which is that when Basil escapes the plan, he does it just in time to smile for the camera, which is delightful in itself. But also, it's a brilliant little bit of shorthand for why one of our, how many times have we seen a James Bond movie where it's like, just stay and make sure Bond is dead, you fucking idiot. Like, why aren't you just staying to make sure he's dead first? The reason Rattigan isn't doing that is very simple. Basil got there late, and now he has to go actually commit to his plan, and the plan is more important to him. So the Basil thing is, and it's simply done, but it means you don't question it in the way you occasionally would if you were reviewing a James Bond movie. And I just think that's delightfully done, and it leads to a great gag. Just everything about it. It's telling you something about the characters. It creates an interesting situation, and it leads to a gag, and it solves arguably a potential plot problem if you were like, why does Rattigan not make sure Basil's dead before he leaves? So yeah, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Basil smiling for the Polaroid. Wonderful. So yeah, I think that's the last note I have. I think we've thoroughly reviewed the movie.
And I would agree. I think again a wholehearty recommend. A piece with more. It feels like more attention to character and depth and atmosphere than you would expect for a movie of this type. Yeah. So I can't wait to hear about why the poster prioritizes Tony the dog. And with that, it leads us in nicely to let's triv it up.
Yeah, I'm going to give you some trivia. So I would like to credit an article first from the USA Today titled "How Basil Saved Disney Feature Animation" by Jim Corkis. Now, I'm going to give with one hand and take away with the other because it is a very well-researched piece of writing, and it's a great source of information, but it's horribly written and structured. Just awful. Absolutely awful. I'm so sorry, but you did such great research. I don't know how you could write an article that jumps around so much that it gave me a fucking headache. So, what a shame. But it is still, if you're interested to learn more about this movie, and I think it's a really interesting article because of the content and the work that clearly went into learning a bunch about this film. On his part, and much of the information I'm going to share with you today comes from his research and his work. It's a 2-part article, and I think the original USA Today website that held it is down, but you can get it through the Wayback Machine. If you go to the Basil wiki, part 2 isn't in the... So if you scroll right to the bottom where you can see the sources for the information in the Basil, the Great Mouse Detective wiki, but they have a link to the Wayback Machine's version of part 1, and from there you can find part 2. So it's worth reading. It's worth reading. So give them a shout. I know I criticize the writing and the structure of it, but like it's a complicated story to tell, and finding a clean narrative finding a sequential way to tell this story is difficult. I appreciate, because I was presented with that same problem. So yeah, let's start. Let's hit 1977, Chris. Disney are in production on a film called The Rescuers, and there were talks as that was wrapping up about doing a Sherlock Holmes with animals. The most popular idea being to do Sherlock as a dog, which I think makes a lot of sense. I could sort of see that movie, and that sounds charming and very Disney. But it was actually a layout artist that worked for Disney called Joe Hale who heard them talking about this and essentially was like, hey, someone already did an animal Sherlock. It's these books called Basil of Baker Street, and he basically was the one who suggested simply adapting them instead. The problem was that The Rescuers is also about mouse detectives. So the project did not move forward for several years because they were a bit like, yeah, we just did that. We can't do that again. So we reached the early 80s, and some of Disney's animators were unhappy with the direction of the current major Disney production, which was The Black Cauldron. The Black Cauldron? The Black Cauldron, if I can pronounce things correctly. I need to enunciate. The Black Cauldron was a bit of a disaster, famous disaster for Disney on all fronts. So they thought a possible solution would be to start another unit, the disgruntled animators, separate them off, and let them start working and developing new film. Because this was not the era where you got staffed on a film, where this was not you are hired to help make this movie. They were Disney's in-house animators. They were always developing something, right? They were always just working at something, whatever the current project was. So splitting them off into 2 units was a bit of a novel idea at the time. But that's when the idea of adapting Basil gets pitched again in 82. And president of Disney at the time, Ron Miller, who I don't know anything about other than that he was very bad at running Disney. He felt enough time had passed to approve a second unit to begin developing this project, specifically Basil. So they start looking at this movie in 82, and he was going to produce the film himself, and over time he'd given the film 3 directors. I don't know why, but yeah, Bernie Mattison, John Musker, and Dave Michner. Now you may have, some listeners will have noticed that Dave Michner doesn't end up, I don't believe, with a credit on this movie as a director, or does he? Does he end up with a credit in the end? Let me check. Oh, no, he does. Okay. All 4 ultimate directors get credit with this. But some of you will recognize the name Musker, and we'll come back to why later. So the earliest idea was for Olivia to be to be older and be a potential love interest for Dawson at this time. That was the idea. Miller suggested the character be a little girl because he basically thought the audience would feel more sorry for her. Another idea that was from this time period that ultimately got dropped was a stool pigeon who always hung around Buckingham Palace and gives Basil the tip-off about some of the plans, and that's how Basil kind of puts it together, what Rattigan's up to. The writers dropped this after deciding that Basil should probably figure it out for himself. So that's some of the early ideas they had for the film they were developing. I will say as well, the original idea for the film was it was going to be longer, but also... my brain just died. Whatever I was about to say is gone, so I'm going to move on. So the problem is that Disney was having a massive slump at the time and had several notable flops because of Ron Miller, who, as I mentioned, was not very good at running Disney. Tron was a big one. I think he'd overseen Popeye, the famous Disney disaster. Return to Oz, another very expensive disaster. And it seemed like at the time he was overseeing what was going to become another disaster in the Black Cauldron. It had not been released yet, but it was costing a huge amount of money. No one was happy with it. Problems afoot. So in 1984, they chuck him. The board of directors basically oust him in 84 and hire Michael Eisner, who had been running Paramount, and he got there and immediately appointed Jeffrey Katzenberg to become chairman of the film division. So Eisenberg is running Disney as a whole, Katzenberg is running the film division. And while 3 years of work had at this point been done on developing Basil, it hadn't actually received official green light to start animating yet. And they'd even gained that fourth director in a man called Ron Clements, who, again, we will come back to. But basically, when this management shift happens at Disney, they have to re-pitch the movie to the new bosses, because otherwise they're not going to get the money. So the problem is it didn't exist yet. It was just small pieces of test animation, character designs, and storyboards. And Eisner did not help by openly admitting that he found the storyboarding process confusing. He didn't understand it. He didn't care to be exposed to a movie that way. And him and Katzenberg complained about the slow pacing. They had a lot of questions about Basil's relationship with Dawson. My favourite element of hearing about how Eisner did not know what he was doing, especially in these early years, is he suggested Michael Jackson do the song in the bar scene. This suggestion was met with an uncomfortable silence, and he then withdrew the suggestion.
I mean, at the time, though, Michael Jackson would have been a big star. Why? You know what I mean? Just
would that have been an appropriate tone for the movie to have a Michael Jackson song halfway through?
I mean, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the cabaret or burlesque or whatever you want to talk about it.
Well, this is what would have replaced it. Well, I mean, that's a different version of the word appropriate, isn't it? I mean, that's not appropriate for children, but fits the tone of this sort of quite seedy, like dark movie with Sherlock Holmes in the bar and like the cabaret sequence is not appropriate for children, but it does fit the tone of the movie. I would have. If Michael Jackson suddenly appeared in this movie and did a song on that stage, I would have questions. If Mouse Jackson hits the stage...
Well, it would have been way more appropriate for Michael Jackson to do a movie with Rattigan, because of obviously the Vincent Price connection. That would have just been funny. If Vincent Price introed a Michael Jackson song in this movie, that would have been fucking hilarious.
Yeah, and look, I sort of see what Eisner was going for, because he's thinking like, how do we get butts in seats?
That's what I mean.
How do we get butts in seats?
I don't think it's madness, is what I'm saying, I guess.
Oh no, I think it's madness. It does not fit the movie. But I think it's like there's a thread of logic that I sort of understand. I still think it's a really bad choice. Like it would have done nothing but hurt the movie. Like it might have helped the movie at the box office, but it shows his priorities were making money, not making good films, because it's not the right choice for this movie, which is why he made the suggestion and it landed it flew like a lead balloon, because quite frankly, everyone else in that room understood that was not the correct move for this film. Even if, again, I understand his thinking.
Yeah.
He even later it stuck with the notion of it being like, you know, a pop star from the time, because I think at a certain point he talked about as well about Madonna doing a song for that sequence, which would have been more appropriate, but again didn't end up happening for whatever reason. So they have a 3-hour pitch meeting, and Eisner walks back to his office and talks to Katzenberg, and the quote we have is apparently Katzenberg said, "We have 175 people and we're paying them every day to come into work. We're going to pay them whether they make the movie or they don't make the movie, so I guess we ought to make the movie." So I think what we're learning here is that Eisner and Katzenberg did not understand Basil or care for this film. Yeah. They were looking at this from a purely money perspective and a business perspective. So they ordered rewrites before they would commit more money to commence animation, which is, I think, probably reasonable if they thought the movie was maybe slow or whatever. So they do the rewrites, and in the fall of 1984, the production is finally given the green light, but with a catch. Basil, originally, based on the plan for the movie they wanted to make, was projected to need a $24 million budget and was targeting a Christmas 87 release. They greenlit it with a $10 million budget, and they moved the planned release date up to summer 86. So, in hindsight, it seems clear that at least at first, Eisner did not see much value in Disney animated features as a division. Rumours have suggested that he basically felt they had a valuable enough back catalogue that they could rely on re-releases rather than making new movies. And this was more common at the time, I will say, a movie to be released, because home video was a newer thing, home releases. Movies went in and out of rotation. Old movies came back into cinemas with some frequency. And his idea or his feeling seems to have been that just to continue putting Disney's quite extensive back catalogue in rotation in cinemas would keep them afloat and not cost very much. And unfortunately, as short-sighted as that thinking is, he did have ultimately some evidence that might have been correct, because when Black Cauldron finally released, 6 months before this film would, it cost $44 million to produce and made 22 at the box office. Famous Disney bomb, just an absolute disaster. But that same year, a re-release of 101 Dalmatians earned $33 million. And that, Chris, is what we call money for old rope.
Yeah, wow, blimey.
So, yeah. But it's clear they were not confident in new movies coming out of Disney, because according to the USA Today article I talked about, within months of production starting on The Great Mouse Detective, the animation staff got moved out of the building in the Burbank studio lot, which was specifically designed for animators, and they got relocated into a converted warehouse in an unsavory part of Glendale, fueling the rumors that they were potentially going to shutter the theatrical animation division of Disney. Imagine that, Disney not making feature films that are animated. Absolutely mad to think about, right? So animation begins on this film in 84, but with the significantly reduced budget I talked about, and only a year and a half to complete. So concessions had to be made. Firstly, the runtime. It was originally set to be 90 minutes. I talked about this earlier. They gutted it down to 74 minutes. They lost several scenes to tighten the story. They reduced the number of characters, and they reworked certain scenes that was going to stay in the movie to make them less expensive. So yeah, that's where we're at. In terms of casting, there's not a lot on alternate casting. Some of the listeners will be glad to hear, because it means we won't take much time on it. But one of the original ideas for Basil, and in fact their first choice, was John Cleese. I think that would have been quite good, if I'm being honest. I like John Cleese.
Yeah, that would have worked.
That would have worked. I like who he got, but I understand that choice. Makes sense. When he either turned it down or negotiations, whatever, it didn't work out. John Cleese didn't want to do it, or whoever nixed it somewhere. Maybe he was too expensive, I'm not sure. But that fell through. So then they were looking at Peter Cook and Michael Palin, because if you can't get John Cleese, someone got Palin's number. Obviously, they ultimately settled on who we have. But another interesting almost casting, Bob Hoskins was considered for the role of Dawson at one point, which I actually
also good.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of this movie with John Cleese and Bob Hoskins is quite a fun idea. Although there's a real warmth in the performance we got from I think his name is Val Bettin, who played Dawson, that I wonder if maybe we'd have lost a little bit of with a Bob Hoskins. I don't know. That man can emote. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think so.
Yeah. I think that could have been quite good. I'm not itching to get to the alternate universe, because who we got's great.
Yeah.
But I must admit, I'd be kind of interested to hear what it sounded like. That's for sure.
I think Who We Got did such a brilliant job that it's fine. But those are some of the better alternative castings I've heard. And you do wonder whether, if the movie had those names, whether it might have been a more of a cult classic or a bigger hit. Who knows?
Well, yeah, we'll talk about that later, because this movie's in a really interesting position and for its place in history, because it's we'll come back to that, because I think that's a wider point to get to once we finish talking about the history of the film. So yeah, Vincent Price was an easy get for them, because he just really desperately wanted to do a Disney film, and particularly a villain. It had been a lifelong dream of his. So the second they called, he was like, yes, and jumped at the role. So Rattigan was actually originally designed to look thin and weak, but when Vincent Price came on, even though Vincent Price has quite a slender frame, his voice was so big, they changed the design of Rattigan to match his voice. And during the recording of his lines, the animators actually made sure they were present and watched him, because he made exaggerated sort of Shakespearean gestures, and they drew them and worked them into poses for Rattigan in the movie. So yeah, Rattigan is Vincent Price in a way many of these characters aren't necessarily their actors, if that makes sense. Vincent Price lives in that character in a way that some of these others don't. Oh, excuse me. I've had this cough for like 2 weeks and it will not shift. Horrible. Don't recommend it. Basil was modeled on Bing Crosby in his original form, but they ultimately took inspiration from someone called Leslie Howard, who I was supposed to look up and didn't get time to do, but there you go. If you know who Leslie Howard is, I'm sure that's very interesting information. The final 2-minute geometric background maze of clockwork and gears was the work of Tad Gilo and character animator Phil Nibelink. It's one of the first, not the first, but it is one of the first instances of computer animation in a Disney movie. And the way they did it was quite clever, actually. So they designed the cogs in computer and, in a computer format. In fact, I actually got, I'm just going to read the quote, because Nibelink explained his process with an interviewer called Steve Podrowski in '86. He said, "We printed the computer animation of the wheels on special pieces of paper, which were then photocopied onto cells, and then later colored in the traditional way. We tried to color them on the computer, but there was too great a difference between the computer result and the rest of the film." So they basically designed the cogs in a computer so they could be like very geometrically correct and move in a very click, click, click exact way. Then they just literally physically printed each frame and used that to transfer onto the cells of the animation, and then they drew the characters on top of it and colored it in. Now, he did mention they tried to color it in with the computer, but the result, it looked very different from the coloring that the rest of the movie had, so it didn't really work. So that's why they left it as just sort of black and white pencil lines and then essentially colored them in afterwards. But it is really impressive when you watch the movie. It's a brilliant scene, and and the visuals of those cogs are really excellent.
Yeah, brilliant, and kind of almost like that all makes sense because the sequence, and I'm surprised it didn't come up actually when we were reviewing. The sequence almost feels like a different style. Do you know what I mean? It almost feels, it does feel different in some way. It kind of feels like, it felt very modern. It felt different. It felt quite trippy, and that's it. Yeah, it does feel distinct to the rest of the animation in the movie, for sure. Yeah.
And I've just realized, I talked about Basil choosing to save Olivia over finishing Ratigan in that sequence, didn't I? I did. I talked about that. Okay. Yeah, because that was like a big moment.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you talked about it, and I mentioned it in the context of showing that there is a bit of an arc in him, and I think then when answering that also talked about it.
Yeah. When at the moment when she's about to get squished and he jumps on the chain and goes up to save her, genuinely and I'm like, it's a Disney movie. They're obviously not squishing this child, but the fact that even for a second I was like, oh shit, don't die, tells you how well the movie is done. Because if they even for a millisecond made me doubt, then they've done a really good job at creating tension. Also, we didn't talk about it, but the cleverness of Basil on the clock hands and him knowing that the chime was about to change and that was about to throw them, that genius as well. We didn't talk about that, but that's a really clever idea. And also his solution to not falling to his death, that was also very satisfying. I knew it was coming because I remembered it as it was happening, but that music hitting and him coming up through the clouds on that little bit of the blimp, pedaling it really fast to sort of give himself upward thrust. I thought that was really clever. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree. That's great.
In the original books, the character is also called Basil. The books, as I mentioned, were called Basil of Baker Street. And the author named him Basil specifically to name him after Basil Rathbone, who played Sherlock Holmes in 14 films. I didn't know it had been that many. You know of Basil Rathbone having famously played Sherlock Holmes, but I didn't realize he did 14 movies. That's so many movies for one actor to play one character. And actually, a really funny thing, complete coincidence, in The Adventure of Black Peter, which, funnily enough, actually, that's an old Sherlock Holmes story I was listening to in audiobook form like a few weeks ago. Really funny coincidence. But in that story, Holmes disguises himself, and this is an original Arthur Conan Doyle, so this is well before any of this is in the mind of anyone, but he disguises himself and goes by the name Basil briefly, which is just another weird little coincidence.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, well, another funny thing about this movie, Chris, is Sherlock Holmes, proper Sherlock Holmes, has dialogue. For those who aren't aware, again, the premise of the movie, there's a real Sherlock Holmes in this world, and Basil is the mouse that lives in his house. And there's a moment when we see him in shadow, we never see him, and he's talking. That's Basil Rathbone's voice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
So a lot of people believe it's from a 1940s performance from a film, but this is actually not true. That cameo is taken from Basil Rathbone was hired later in life to read a Sherlock Holmes story, The Adventure of the Red-Headed League, which again actually very coincidentally is a Sherlock. At the moment, completely coincidentally, I am re-listening to through Audible the Stephen Fry read Sherlock Holmes thing. It's like 72 hours, so I'm going to be getting through it. It's going to take me years. It's not going to be a quick one, but I'm sort of listening to it at night before I go to sleep rather than doom scrolling. It's been very nice. But the Red-Headed League, there was an audiobook version of it or a radio version of it, and they'd hired Basil Rathbone. He was older at that point, but he was no longer playing Sherlock Holmes in film, so they had him read for Cardamom Records in '66, only months before his death, that particular story. So the dialogue you hear in this movie of Sherlock speaking is Basil Rathbone reading that audiobook for Cardamom Records in '66. So it actually is Basil Rathbone's voice, and that's really neat. Now, this explains why they actually have you also hear a brief Watson voice. That's not Nigel Bruce, who was the Watson to Basil Rathbone's Sherlock. If that makes sense. It's a different actor.
Yeah, it does make sense.
And that's why, because it was taken from an audiobook. They didn't have the rights to those old films. So there you go. Now, the Let Me Be Good to You segment, the cabaret sequence, as we've been referring to it as, was almost cut from the movie. Because even though the lyrics on their own were on the line maybe, but they weren't. There's nothing too explicit in the lyrics. There was concern about the animation being too risque for Disney and for a family film. The animators apparently nearly got a PG rating, but they disputed it by they appealed to the censors, Chris, on the grounds that the segment was a cabaret song with harmless lyrics, and because the character singing is a mouse, not a human, that is not questionable. I would say...
Is the character say...
Yeah. I would say there are a lot of furries out there that would disagree.
Yeah.
I think this material is still... No, the joke about the furries aside, I still think the material is quite inappropriate for children.
Yeah, I agree.
But and this is actually, we're going to talk about it here, this is actually part of the problem, Chris. So, the movie comes out in 87, but it is not permitted to get a home release because of that sequence.
Really? Because of that scene?
Yes. It has a home media ban.
Well, in that case, it was definitely they definitely made the wrong call there then.
Yeah. And actually, many have speculated this is one of the reasons this movie never generated sequels or became a franchise. Well, there's one other very big reason I'll get to later as well. The animators of this movie really pissed off the Disney bigwigs, and we'll talk about why in a minute. It's one of my favorite pieces of trivia we'll ever cover. It's glorious. We'll come back to that in a second. We're close to that. But basically, yeah, it wasn't allowed to be released on home media in its original state. But the movie in 1992 got a re-release in cinemas, as was the fashion at the time, and many attempts previously to get it on band so they could home release it. Once it had been re-released in cinemas, they were then able to release it back on video again in sort of like 93, which is actually when young Dan comes across the movie. That re-release of the film in cinemas is what leads to a final home video release, which is how it ends up in my lap. Because that was a new video. I remember, like, my mum bought it at, like, a supermarket because it was on the shelf and she bought something to shut me up, I think. And, like, I'm certain that's its first home video release post the banning being undone, based on the timeline. It's almost perfect. 93, 94 is when I get this movie on VHS. So yeah, that really does track. So, a few little details before we go on to the last few, the more serious stuff about the movie's release and its place in Disney history. When Rattigan is ranting about how much he hates Basil, a fun little detail is he has a voodoo doll in the shape of a mouse in a deerstalker on his desk. Bears a striking resemblance to Basil. But funnily enough, he looks more like the illustrations from the Basil of Baker Street books than Basil in this Disney movie. So it's a little nod to Paul Galden's illustrations, which I think is nice. It's a nice little detail.
Nice, yeah, that's cool.
If you pay attention to the scene where they're in the toy shop, Olivia does not utter a single word after Basil says, "Not a word out of you, is that clear?" No matter what's happening in that scene, she never says another word.
Nice, fair play. That's
delightful.
Good. That's good attention to detail. Yeah.
In The Sign of Four, the original Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes story, Holmes borrows a dog, and its name is Toby, which is the name that the dog in this story is given. I think that's nice. When Toby howls, it's actually just taken from Trusty's howl from Lady and the Tramp. So that's a reused sound effect from the Disney library. And funny thing as well, this movie does contain a little reference to Dumbo. There's a toy in the toy figurine in the toy shop scene that resembles Dumbo. So yeah, let's see. The date in this movie is the real date that they celebrated the Queen's Diamond Jubilee in 1897, which is when this movie is set. So,
nice.
Yeah, so the Jubilee actually fell on the 20th, but that year they chose to celebrate it a few days later on the 22nd. I don't know if that was to avoid like a bank holiday or a working day or something, but they moved it to the 22nd of June, which is the date it takes place in this movie. So the Queen Victoria is having her Diamond Jubilee at the exact same time as the Mouse Queen, and for whatever reason, Dawson, a mouse, served in Afghanistan. Don't question it.
It's not. Yeah, it doesn't need to be thought about. Don't worry about the details.
Nope.
Where'd the cars come from? Forget about it. Who cares?
Yep. The Clock Tower sequence is heavily inspired by Lupin 3, Castle of Cagliostro, which is Hayao Miyazaki's first film before he went on to be the Studio Ghibli guy. I only mention that one because that's like the piece of trivia you always hear about this movie, is that it was inspired by Hayao I never know how to pronounce his first name. Hayao Miyazaki. His first film. And I've seen Castle of Cagliostro, and it's brilliant. And I totally understand why the Disney animators will have taken inspiration from that. 100% makes perfect sense. We've already talked about this, but the ending of the movie is a reference to The Final Problem. We don't need to cover that. Holmes later returned, obviously, in the Adventure of the Empty House, but Moriarty did not, to my knowledge. I should have googled that, but I didn't. Now, very quick, Chris, before we get into some juicy fun stuff. Wait, let me just check. Wait, is something missing? No, it's here. Okay. It's time for my new favorite segment. I can't believe it's trivia. I'm going to read this.
You're really sticking with this, aren't you?
Well, you know what, Chris? I was going to drop it this week, and then I read this, right? And I want you to I'm going to read it exactly as it's written, and you can tell me if you think this should be in the trivia, right? And you're going to, when you hear the first sentence, you're going to think, obviously that should be in the trivia, Dan. And then you're going to hear the rest of it and go, no. This was one of the last movies to have the end appear at the end of the movie. Most of Hollywood had long abandoned this tradition in the 70s. Disney had been a holdout and kept doing this into the 80s. So far, so good. By the time the 90s rolled around, even Disney abandoned it altogether. They still occasionally use it, though, in films like Aladdin from 1992 and The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1996. So, if this is the last movie to have the end, then what are we doing?
Okay. Well, maybe it's the last movie to have the end at the end of every movie, is the point it's trying to make.
Maybe. Ugh, gross. Yeah, just awful. Absolutely awful. Now, here's another one from I Can't Believe It's Trivia. This is just 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, but in a really strange way. Vincent Price was actually the visual inspiration behind Doctor Strange, the character Doctor Strange, the Marvel character. Doctor Strange is played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who would later go on to play Sherlock Holmes. It's full circle, it's full circle, it's full circle. Who the fuck wrote that in the trivia? Go home, you're drunk.
Yeah, okay, that one I agree with more than the first one.
Yeah, neither of those should be trivia. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. A piece of trivia that's like, it's the last movie that used the end, except for these movies that did it after it. Like, what are you fucking doing? I don't know, man. Whatever. Anyway.
Yeah, but like I said, I think the point it's making is the last movie to use the end at a point where every Disney movie had the end at the end.
Maybe. All right, let's talk about the fun stuff, because now let's find out why Disney tried to un-Sherlock their Sherlock movie. So, Spielberg was over at Paramount at the time of this movie, making a movie called Young Sherlock Holmes.
Pesky Spielberg.
I know. At it again. Young Sherlock Holmes is a fucking disaster, right? It's not a popular movie. It's a rare Spielberg flop in those days, and Disney panicked from a business perspective. Katzenberg and Eisner were like, "Oh shit, Sherlock," because Hollywood always learns the wrong lesson. It's not that movie wasn't of interest to people. It wasn't marketed right. It didn't come out at the right time, or it came out against. There's probably 1,000 reasons that movie flopped, right? But I guarantee you, Sherlock Holmes, just as a premise, was not the fucking reason. But these people are fucking, as always, learning the wrong lesson because of incompetence. So they start panicking because they've got a Sherlock Holmes movie essentially being finished, right? In Basel. So they asked the animators originally to undo the Britishness of the movie, for a start. They even considered redubbing the film with American accents. And these concerns really are evident when you look at the marketing for the movie, particularly in the US. Basil wears a weird blue suit instead of his Sherlock outfit from the film with the deerstalker hat. It looks all kinds of wrong, but you can absolutely see how they try to un-British the movie in the marketing. The Queen from the movie is not wearing her crown. They've given her a weird sort of half-crown hat. She doesn't look like a queen at all on that poster. They've focused on unusual characters. They've pushed characters like Dawson, who looks very British, to the background. They have just absolutely tried to do this, and it peaked with the name, because the movie had been until that point, Chris, named for its source material. It was called Basil of Baker Street, but Disney marketing claimed, and I'm gonna labor the word claimed, that they'd done testing and that children had preferred the title The Great Mouse Detective over Basil of Baker Street. So this seems to me to be a very transparent attempt to un-Sherlock their Sherlock adaptation. All of this, top to bottom, is just horrendous Disney panicking. But it led to one of my favourite memos, or leaked memos of all time. For those who aren't aware, and this is quite a famous part of this story, and I was very familiar with this before I sat down to do this trivia. A disgruntled crew produced a fake memo labelled as being from the desk of Vice President of Feature Animation Peter Schneider that made fun of this title change by suggesting other classic Disney titles would be getting new names. Now, we're going to play a quick game here, Chris, of which movie do you think this is. The memo is kind of legendary now, but it included Seven Little Men Help a Girl,
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs,
Colour and Music,
Colour and Music.
I'll give you. I'll tell you. That's a harder one. Do you want me to tell you, or do you want to try and guess?
Yeah, go on, tell me.
That one is Fantasia.
Right. Okay. Yep.
The Little Deer Who Grew Up.
Bambi.
The Wonderful Elephant Who Could Really Fly.
Dumbo.
Two Dogs Fall in Love.
Beauty and the Beast.
No,
sorry, not Beauty and the Beast. Lady and the Tramp.
Yeah, poor Bell.
Sorry,
Chris just called Bell a dog.
Beauty and the Beast. Sorry.
Wow.
Sorry to all Bella fans. Hugely offensive that. Accidentally, but Lady and the Tramp.
The other one, some more we have. Puppies Taken Away. not going to get over that. That's going to take a second.
Sorry. 101
You know what?
Dalmatians.
Yeah, Puppies Taken Away is 101 Dalmatians. And a boy, a bear, and a black cat.
The Jungle Book?
Yep. And the girl with see-through shoes.
Cinderella.
Yeah, exactly. And then just to twist the knife in a little more and to mock more recent Disney products, they left Aristocats on the list unchanged. Same name.
That's great.
Now,
Fair play.
this was an internal joke about Disney being dumb and changing the name of the movie. The problem, unfortunately, for this movie is that a copy was leaked to the LA Times. Now, a predictable sequence follows, right? Obviously, an investigation and a search for the offender, the culprit, followed this. The film's crew never gave names. No snitches. No snitches here. Now, in subsequent years, the memo has been credited to an animator called Ed Gombert, and if that is correct, I salute you, sir. Wonderful piece of satire. Sorry it got leaked and probably made everyone's lives more difficult. But the studio did not forget this, Chris. This movie then became the enemy to the studio that were releasing it. They were already convinced the film would fail, and this was basically the final straw. So huge portions of the film's marketing were withdrawn before the initial release. So much so that the plan to have characters from this movie appear in costume at Disneyland were scrapped.
Right.
And it was extremely unusual for Disney to have a new movie and not have the characters be interactable at the parks. That's the game, right? That's the system. You release a new movie, you make characters, you make merch. There's a system. There's a cycle for these things. You do one, you do the other. So this was such a problem for Roy E. Disney, who is, and I mean this, I think Nadia, we joked last night, we were talking about like Roy E. Disney's position in the family, and Nadia was like, "No, this is pure blood Disney. This is like the grandson of Walt Disney." He personally stepped in because of this, and provided the funds himself to develop the costumes for the meet and greet characters, because he did not like the idea of them not being at the park. Like, the idea that there'd be a Disney movie in theaters, a kid would go see it, and would then go to the park like, "Where's Basil?" and not find him, was too much for Roy E. Disney to put up with. So he personally funded Basil and Ratigan getting costumes, therefore characters, at the park.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, fair play to him.
Yeah,
I mean, that's mad.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about Roy E. Disney and his role at the company at the time, but that's a good move. I like that he did that. Now, despite the lack of support, the film did not end up performing too badly. But it's important to think about its position in history at this stage, because it's not very well remembered. I myself, when I chose it, was like, oh, it's like an interesting piece of history because it's just from that weird dark period where Disney were producing flops like The Black Cauldron and what had come before that, I can't even remember. Or maybe The Fox and the Hound, or Oliver and Company. Sorry, shuddered. I shuddered thinking of Oliver and Company. So I was just like, oh yeah, it's from that weird dark age. It's like a small bright light in a really bad lineup of films. But actually, Chris, this movie is kind of responsible for what follows, which is the Disney Renaissance, for two reasons. One, it made money. Like, actually made money. The Black Cauldron had come out earlier in the year, and I already talked about how that performed. Same year as Basil. Comes out in the summer. $44 million budget, $20 million return. Absolute disaster. The company's in the red. Basil comes out, and while I don't have complete worldwide box office data for Basil, on a final budget of $14 million, that's what they ended up spending to make the movie, even though it was budgeted $10, they went a bit over. The film turned a $38 million profit in the US, and several sources have suggested it made a further $12 million internationally, which would bring its total to $50. Now, that $12 million is not verified, so I put that to a side for now. But even with that in mind, that's a solid box office. But then it gets a re-release in 92, where it makes another $13 million. So even if we don't include international, this movie makes $50 million in the US alone, more than $60 million internationally. Easily.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So why have I never heard of this movie before?
Well, I think two reasons. I think reason number one is Disney didn't market it at all. They buried the movie. The second reason is it didn't get a VHS release for a very long time. The other reason is there were only two of the characters at the parks. They'd been funded by Roy Disney himself, so I'm willing to bet there wasn't much in the way of merchandise, toys, supplemental material. There then wasn't sequels. There wasn't any sort of attempt to franchise. Disney themselves kind of made this movie, in people's minds, part of that weird little era of the movies that kind of flopped. But it got a good critical reception too. So this movie made money, but was just part of this strange era of Disney where they were almost ashamed of their animated film division. But here's the thing. They lost so much money on the Black Cauldron. Eisner was looking to shutter Disney's animation division. So Basil comes along, makes all that money, and look, this ain't one of their, the classics where they spent $10 million to make a movie and it made 160. We're not talking about, Disney's golden era when they were making millions and millions, just hand over fist for anything they put in cinemas. But it was enough to balance the failure of the Black Cauldron, which kept the animation studios open. And now I want to come back to something I talked about earlier, which is this movie's directors. There are four: Ron Clements, Bernie Mattison, Dave Michner, and John Musker. Now, some of you are thinking, Musker and Clements? Musker and Clements. Where do I know those names? Well, I'll tell you where you know those names. The fucking Little Mermaid. Aladdin. The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Hercules. Disney's Renaissance happens because of these two fucking directors. And they also went on to do The Princess and the Frog and fucking Moana. Oh, remember Moana? Clements and Musker are hugely responsible for Disney's rise back to animation supremacy. So we go from a company where they're about to go bust, they're saved by a movie made by Clements and Muster, who had, let's keep in mind, gotten the movie over the line at a way reduced budget and in a way reduced amount of time, and it had still turned a profit. So when Clements goes to Disney and says, the next thing I want to make is a movie about a mermaid, yeah, you better fucking bet your ass they greenlit that movie. So without Basil, we literally don't have the Disney Renaissance for a number of reasons, both financial and in terms of the stepping stone it was for Musker and Clements, and it was the first time those two worked together as well, so it brought that partnership together, and those two have gone on to direct several of Disney's greatest films. I cannot express to you, and there is another element of Musker and Clements' story that is marred of weird tragedy, because the whole time all they wanted to do was make Treasure Planet, and Disney were like, make the Mermaid movie first, and they're like, can we, with that was a hit, can we make Treasure Planet now? They're like, how about Aladdin? They're like, okay, fine, we made Aladdin, can we make Treasure Planet now? Hercules? Fine. Okay, we've made Hercules. We keep making you hits. Can we make Treasure Planet? Disney like, yeah, okay, you can finally make Treasure Planet. But we're not going to market it at all. It's going to be a fucking disaster. Anyway, one day we'll cover Treasure Planet. It's fascinating. Their passion project. Oh, I feel sad for Musker and Clements. But yeah, for a million reasons, this is an absolute, essential part of Disney history. 100%. Another weird little detail, actually, I should clarify. When it got re-released in 1992, it got renamed again for no reason. It was now called The Adventures of the Great Mouse Detective. Absolutely inexplicable. No idea why. No idea why.
Well, and we should say, because obviously we talked about the reasons why, but obviously one of those de-Sherlocking mismatched marketing of it all is if you look at the US poster, the dog is the film is literally called The Great Mouse Detective, and there's this massive fucking dog on the poster. Yeah. It's mad.
Yeah. And that's why in the UK it's called Basil the Great Mouse Detective, but in America it's simply called the Great Mouse Detective, because they thought Basil, being a British name, would scare away audiences who are clearly allergic to things what are British, because they de-Britished their movie, at least in the marketing. Obviously, the movie was made. It doesn't, there's only so much you can do to undo the choice of having made, a movie about Sherlock. So yeah, and it had an interesting UK release as well, actually, because you'd think this movie probably did quite well in England when it came out for that reason, being a bit of a Sherlock adaptation and all that stuff. But actually, it sort of suffered for bad luck because multiplexes weren't a big thing in the UK at the time. They weren't as common. So it struggled to find screen availability because Top Gun and Aliens were still successfully filling in the evenings. And if you've only got one screen in your cinema, or at most two, because multiplexes aren't a thing, you've got to be careful what you're choosing to show, right? So Top Gun and Aliens are dominating the evenings. You're thinking, well, that's okay. Daytime. That's when kids' movies play in the daytime, especially back in the day. Yeah, The Flight of the Navigator and The Frog Prince, both family-oriented films, also came out at this time. So even though they cleverly released it during a half term in the UK, it still underperformed in the UK by quite some way. So yeah, bit of a disaster for them, unfortunately. So yeah, that's Basil, everyone. I don't have a Cars Exist, actually. I just realised I got so sucked in for the first time. We're just not doing Cars Exist. Sorry, there you go. I've broken a streak.
Is there a car in the movie? I don't know if there is a.
Usually even when there isn't a Cars Exist, I'm like, guns exist, or mice exist, right, and I give it. Right. But I don't even have an equivalent. I don't have an exists. So sorry. Sherlock exists. No, there you go.
Sherlock exists. Hello, Watson.
So, yeah.
I don't know.
So what? I continue to be baffled by this movie's place in history, like you, Chris. This weird, forgotten, but absolutely essential part to Disney's history.
And good. A financial success, critically acclaimed, and a genuinely good movie.
Yeah, just lost.
It's just forgotten about.
And again, I feel like, and this might be a controversial thought. I feel like if Disney don't shit out Oliver and Company, then people don't cite Little Mermaid as the start of the Renaissance. They cite Basil. But because between Basil and The Little Mermaid, you've got Oliver and Company, which is, by every stretch of the imagination, shit. Even as a kid, and I was an easy to please child, I had very low standards for a film. Even the films that I now acknowledge are bad, the worst I would say about a film in in this era was that it wasn't, that it was good, that it was fine. It's still a good movie. All movies are good movies. I hadn't gotten cynical yet. I hadn't gotten critical yet. But even child Dan watched it once and never touched it again. Did not care for it at all. Oliver and Company is a pile of shit. But if Oliver and Company doesn't come out between the two, I feel like people don't cite The Little Mermaid as the start of the Renaissance. I feel like they'd cite Basil, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, but it was a success, on the available metrics. So I think it would be. Yeah. How could you not cite that as the beginning of the Renaissance, or at least at the very least a prelude to it, If there wasn't, like you say, a failure in between.
Yeah. It's a remarkable story. And I really did genuinely just sit down thinking we were going to have some light triv, because it's not a movie anyone talks about. Like with the last few films we've done on this. I thought, sticking with the theme of the season, I'll have some details about its connection to Sherlock, maybe some alternate casting, and maybe some stories of the fact that, at the time Disney was struggling. Because I know this is from that, that era. I had no idea that this movie had... such an important place in Disney history. So yeah, I hope you've all learned something, because let me tell you, the document for the triv on this was 2,500 words long, and it took me 4.5 hours to put together. So I hope everyone...
Well, thank you for the work. It was worth it, I would say.
Yeah, I compared it to my notes document for Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz was nearly 5,000 words, so I knew it was a roughly half a Wizard of Oz trivia. So yeah. Anyway, I think I think that's everything. I don't know. We just got to solve the question of we recommend the film. We've got to solve the question of what we're doing next, Chris.
Absolutely do. Well, so what we're doing next, Dan, is I was thinking about that theme, and the theme of the series has been films we remember watching and enjoying, but sort of forgotten films, and sort of going back into them and going, were they forgotten for a reason?
Well, forgotten sometimes is a strong word, because I think people know Babe exists, but like just not talked about in the lexicon of film. No one's citing Babe as like an influential film. And certainly no one is citing even Basil, which is physically an influential film. So it's forgotten is like a really true description of this.
Yeah, well, the phrase I keep using is the Spider-Man trilogy aside, when the most pop culture movie you've done in the series is Babe, like that's sort of saying something. So I thought of a film, and a lot of my choices have been sort of earlier and classic, but I thought of a more recent film, and at first I was like, and then I was like, well, actually, it'll be before Kubo and the Two Strings, which we did this series, so it's fine to potentially pick this film, even though it is a little more recent than, Getting Even with Dad, for example. And then I Googled the film to see what year it came out, and at the top of Google, when I Google this film, is a review of the film from The Guardian. And I read the first line of that review, which I will read to you now, Dan. And I think you'll agree that when I read the first line of the review, I had no choice but to go, well, we're doing that. We're doing this movie then.
Oh my God.
This is the first line of the review from, and I repeat, The Guardian, right? Yeah. This is the worst film of the week. A dire British comedy to which the only response is to soil and then set fire to the Union flag in the foyer of your local cinema.
Oh my God. So for anyone missing some British context there, The Guardian are sort of like, they're supposed to be like our reasonable press. They're supposed to be like our, like the sort of thoughtful left wing, left wing, it depends on the moment, but they're supposed to be like they're a bit prestigious. The Guardian is supposed to be a respectable paper.
A bit, yeah.
That's incredible. Soil the Union flag, the Union Jack, and then set it on fire in the foyer of a cinema. As a person who used to work in cinemas in my youth, that's fucking mad. The cleanup alone.
Yeah, obviously don't do that. And it's funny because it's the second line is very cutting, but so much more Guardian. So the second line is, it is incredibly co-produced by BBC Films and HBO. And that snivelling sound you can hear is Lord Reach, David Attenborough, Tony Soprano and Larry David crying helplessly in each other's arms out of pure shame.
What the fuck are we about to watch? Mate, I genuinely have no idea what this movie is. I thought maybe I'd figure it out.
Well, A movie, by the way, which I know for a fact, you and I have both watched and enjoyed at the time. So whether we change our opinion remains to be seen. But yeah, no, I know factually we've both seen it and I know we both enjoyed it. Whether we will on rewatch, who knows? Whether we'll be quite as scathing as the Guardian have been. So we're going to rewatch, we're going to do 2009's frequently asked questions about time travel.
Oh, I did enjoy that movie.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I like it as a choice for this season's theme because it's almost the forgotten movie that wasn't wasn't at all part of the Cornetto trilogy, but sort of has that vibe and covers a subject in a, similar way. I think it is, and it's got some, it's got Chris O'Dowd, who obviously went on to become a bit of a name, and so I think I think the choice fits. But after I read the first line of that Guardian review, I was like, oh, we have to do this movie.
What was obviously that's it's worth noting, the Guardian review, as respected as the Guardian are, that there will be times when they have a feeling on a film that does not match the general consensus. What was the general consensus on the movie? Was this one very disgruntled reviewer? Let me find out.
I guess
let's Rotten Tomatoes that bad
find
boy
out next time.
Oh,
so 6.9 in IMDb.
Okay, 35% on Rotten Tomatoes, so that's low from critics on the whole. Yeah. Empire Magazine gave it 3 out of 5, but it only goes down from there. That's considered a good review. Oh yikes, 35%.
Yeah, and maybe. Maybe we'll watch it and agree with the critics. Who knows? But I remember we both had fun with that movie. We'll do this next week, but we may have even watched it together.
No, I
remember.
actually I do remember that we didn't, because it came out. We both wanted to watch it. The goal was to watch it together, and then for some reason we couldn't. It came out while we were at uni together. I think we were living together when this movie comes out, and I don't know if it's just because we were both busy with uni projects. I don't know. I don't know if we were both just like steeped in work or other commitments, but we just couldn't find time to watch it. And in the end, we just said, okay, fine, you just watch it when you can, and I'll watch it when I can. And that's what happened. I remember watching it, like, sat on my bed in the place we lived in together. I didn't see it in the cinema. I saw it I watched it on my laptop, like after it came out on, like a home release of some description. So yeah, I remember watching it on my laptop on my bed. In that share house we had. So yeah, wow, that's a great choice, because it is a bit forgotten. I'd sort of forgotten about it. So if the theme of this season is films forgotten by time, this is definitely one of them. Obviously, we are ending this series on 3 films that are absolutely not. For anyone who's not aware,
Spider-Man, yeah.
We are, even though the theme of this season has mostly been films forgotten by time, we are ending with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy to sort of coincide with Brand New Day's release, because, SEO, search engine optimization is the way forward, and also, maybe someone will listen to the podcast, because right now it's not many. I always make that joke, but it's true. This is our least popular podcast by magnitudes. So,
and I would imagine this would be our least popular series as well. Although we might get that hit from people looking for the movie, because we've definitely done, films that fall into that category. I do think it's quite fun though, because although the movie is far from forgotten, in terms of like that quality issue and is it as bad as people think it is, etc., Spider-Man 3 is not a bad movie to end on thematically for this series, I don't think.
No. Well, yeah, it's a much maligned, but it is still Sam Raimi. I've got to wonder if that movie is. My ponderance about that is the third movie a genuinely bad movie on its own merits, or is it just a bad movie when stacked up to the first 2, which are obviously masterpieces?
Yeah, and obviously,
is it a victim of 2 very, very good movies that it could never possibly live up to, or is it a proper X-Men 3 situation where they just shat the bed, which is possible? I'm not saying.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun to see. I didn't watch that movie until the lead up to No Way Home. I just went years not seeing it.
Oh, really? Anyway, you know what, Chris? I'll tell you this now. I saw it in cinemas and got a refund, not because the movie was bad, because there was a problem with the projector.
Nice. Well, we're here. This is even worse. We're now not. We're not even just talking about the next choice. We're talking about 4 weeks from now. But anyway, yeah. So next week, frequently asked questions about time travel.
Perfect. And if you want to hear that right now, maybe you're a massive FAQ about time travel head. Maybe you're one of maybe you're one of that fan base. You just can't wait to hear it. Patreon.com/nothing-but-static will give you access to our podcast. This podcast 1 week ahead of its usual Spotify, iTunes release. There are many ways to support us. I say this every week, but if you're sick of hearing this bit, I'd switch off now, but or hit 2 times speed or something. But yeah, basically, there's a bunch of ways you can support us. One of them is that Patreon. But if you're thinking, I'd love to support you, but not with money. Perfect. I've several ways you can do that. The first is, of course, just what you're doing now. Keep listening. We love that for you. That's more than enough. Crack on. But if you want to go beyond that, you can tell a friend. You can interact with the podcast on the platform of your choice. There's often the ability to like or review or comment the podcast, usually depending on how you're listening to it. Please do that, because if you interact with the podcast on those platforms, it's more likely to then share the podcast with other people, helps us out, gets us more listeners, which is a good thing. We add more people to our weird little community of people who like talking about old dumb movies. So yeah, we do that. That's all the ways you can do it. Of course, again, I will emphasize keeping listening is the main thing, and we wouldn't really expect anything more than that. I mean, to be honest with you, it's amazing you're even doing that. I'm surprised any of you listen. So good work. So yeah, I think that's all my stuff. I think that. Oh yeah, if you got thoughts. If you've got thoughts on Basil the Great Mouse Detective, you can hit us up on mail@nothingbutstatic.co.uk. Or if you do join the Patreon, that gives you access to our Discord, where you can directly sort of interact. It's not very active these days, but there's chatter on there this week about the Avatar movie, stuff like that. So yeah, there's usually something going on in that on there. It's pretty. It's low effort, but if you have thoughts, you can share them, and I can respond. So there you go. Anyway, that's everything. I'm going to hand over to Chris, who ends this thing.
My name's Chris Billingham.
My name's Dan Doolin.
And this review has been rewound.